We got one more guest here for this Tuesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Rolf Michaels from wagertalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, man?
Adam, going great. No more exciting time than the first week of college football.
Yes, sir. So, of course, we're going to throw a wet blanket on that and talk NFL Preseason Week 4, which is not particularly exciting, but you put out a lot of great information over there at Wager Talk, a lot of stat sheets and different PDFs and all kinds of great, insightful stuff for the readers of that website. So anything you've found for Week 4 of the preseason that maybe we can take advantage of?
I love Week 4. You know, I think that I love it even more because people say, well, I'm not betting Week 4. I don't know who's going to play. The starters don't play. Well, you know what? Week 4 is the most legitimate week in the preseason because coaches don't hide how long their quarterbacks are going to start. It's usually the 3 or the 4 playing the whole game. If he has a rotation, he's going to share that rotation. There's no information he's going to hide. It's really a lot of value because you don't get a lot of the sharps betting in. We've seen some big line moves, and I think what's happened this year is so many people try to jump in, and as soon as the coach announced the quarterback was going to play for a half, they would jump on that side. And then we've seen some games where the quarterback then announced the opposite team. He's going to play his starters a half, so people bought it back. And we've seen some tremendous line moves in the preseason. We don't have that Week 4. What you want to look for is clearly the best quarterbacks that have played. The first thing you want to look for are teams with only 3 quarterbacks. It makes a huge difference. There's a handful of teams that have played 5 quarterbacks this year. When you have a team like the Miami Dolphins or the Oakland Raiders with Josh Rosen, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Jake Ruddick on your lineup, and that's it, those 3 players have split all the snaps. Those 3 players have split all the players' reps. Those 3 players, someone's got to play Week 4. Oakland, you have a quarterback situation. To me, Oakland is the best preseason quarterback rotation there is. Derek Carr, Mike Lennon, Nathan Peterman. Nathan Peterman may have been considered a turnover machine in Buffalo, but under John Gruden, who is a quarterback guru who loves them, he's gone 9 of 12. He's gone 8 of 8. He's gone 23 of 37. Who's going to play the entire Week 4? Nathan Peterman. Again, a huge edge for the Raiders. The next thing you want to look at are offensive lines that play in units. The Cincinnati Bengals, all 3 preseason games, they've switched at least 2 starters in their lineup. They're trying to figure out which group of players plays well on their O-line. There's other teams, I'm not going to mention a couple of them here because there's a few things I have to keep to myself, but there's a few O-lines that play in groups. The 1s play with the 1s, the 2s play with the 2s, the 3s play with the 3s. The edge you get when you get to Game 4, well, those 2s and 3s that played together for those first 3 weeks of the preseason are now a cohesive unit playing for a 4th straight week together. And again, no matter who's quarterbacking, if you have that O-line together, it's my number one thing to look at. Breaking down all the quarterbacks, all the head coaches that have been at their team for the last 4 years, only Quinn of Atlanta is 0-3 Week 4 the last 3 years, and only Harbaugh and Andy Reid at Kansas City are 3-0 against the spread. So there's no magical, I'm going to bet this coach Week 4, I'm going to do this situation. It's number 1, the quarterbacks, number 2, the O-lines, and then just looking at individual situations and at what the coaches have said during the week.
Well, that's interesting because, again, as you said, a lot of people just dismissed this week. And, I mean, even in introducing this part of the segment, I just kind of dismissed this week. But that's kind of the thing about this business, I feel like, is that, you know, the less appreciated a market is, the more value there is in that market. So sounds like you're geared up and ready to fire away here.
I've had actually, it's been my best week the last 3 years, Week 3. And I'm talking about a 68% record going back to the North Coast days the last 5 years in preseason. So I'm not sure how many plays I'm going to have yet. It'll be a lot of reading today. It'll be a lot of reading tomorrow. But again, study those quarterbacks. You know, one of those teams, you know, here's an example of a situation I thought I would absolutely love and how things can change in just a heartbeat. Houston came into the season with Deshaun Watson, A.J. McCarron, and Joe Webb. Well, Joe Webb was on the team last year and was 34 of 60 for 412 yards last season. So you have an experienced number 3. Well, you think going into the preseason, this is an absolute bet on team for me because Bill O'Brien's a quality preseason coach who wants to win games. What happens? A.J. McCarron gets hurt. Joe Webb has to move up to the number 2. They have to sign Jordan Ta'amu, and that brings in now a rookie who they signed August the 7th to now play in preseason games week 2. He signed 2 days before he played. He only played for 10 minutes of the last of week number 2, but he also played last week in week number 3 and threw the ball 5 times. But then you look at last week's game. I know Houston was a popular side. I was not on them. Again, Bill O'Brien, a quality preseason coach, and we know Dallas is not a team that cares about winning the preseason. Well, what happens? First snap of the game, an incomplete pass. Deshaun Watson's quarterbacking. Second play of the game, Lamar Miller tears an ACL. He goes out. Third play of the game, Deshaun Watson gets sacked. Boom. Bill O'Brien pulls every starter 3 plays in when they were supposed to play the first half. So there are some negatives in preseason. You don't pull your starters 3 plays in a regular season game. But in the preseason, he did 3 games in. And if you bet Houston, you were done. That's the reason they got shut out 34-0 is because after 3 plays, the entire lineup that he had said he was going to play were pulled off the field. So knowing why a game lost is as important as you have an asterisk. And I joked around on Twitter. I don't complain about bad beats. When you're in this industry, you get good beats and you bad beats. But almost comically, I had to tweet out that I was on the Colts preseason week 3 last week, and I said it figures it takes me to be on the Colts when your motivational speaker pregame is Andrew Luck retiring. What happens? The Colts they played a sloppy game. Bears had 2 defensive touchdowns, and again, you can't expect those guys to be focused when you're getting that type of news before the game. So. People look at scores, people look at final results, but knowing why a team lost in that situation is just as important as knowing the score. And that follows over into college football as well.
All right, so speaking of Andrew Luck here, I mean, look, obviously I have to crowdsource opinions about that here throughout the week and what the betting impact is of Andrew Luck and his retirement there with the Colts. So what's your take on it all, Rolf?
Well, I tried as soon as it came on to try to go in and bet an under, and I was too late. So obviously I wasn't the first to see the news. But, Andrew Luck to me is as important. I mean, I think they're saying the right things, but, you go from being the favorite in the division to now I think they were plus 300, in the AFC South. I don't think Brissett is a quarterback that can get it done. It's to me, they're now a 3rd or a 4th place team, and Indy is much different than a lot of teams. Luck's salary was so high relative to his team; they didn't have the backups. That's why the Patriots are so successful. Brady is the 16th highest paid quarterback. Well, Brady gets paid less and changes his contracts to be able to bring in other people. When you have some of these teams like Detroit and Andrew Luck and quarterbacks that are getting paid the salaries they are, you don't have the depth as you do as other people. So, the funny thing is, Jacoby Brissett, obviously the starter, that's a game where Brissett was supposed to play the first half. Andrew Luck told his teammates he was going to retire. They pull Brissett last week. They start Phillip Walker, and then Chad Kelly comes in. So I still think they're in the market to trade up for someone. I wouldn't discount him week 1. The line jumped 5 points, and they're getting a touchdown now. But I think when they get on the road mid-season and you have some tough road games, that we're going to see the Colts clearly fall back to be at best the 3rd best team, maybe the worst team now in the AFC South. So he's significant. I don't want to make a guesstimate now at what it's going to value because there's times they surprise you, but to me, he's down quite a notch.
All right, so we transition over to the college football side here, and week 1 coming up on Thursday night, 6 FBS games. And, we touched earlier on in the week about UCLA, Cincinnati, FIU, Tulane, Obviously, the Holy War, everyone's talking about that game here. I wanted to touch on a few different games with you, Rolf, and we'll do that here in a second. But heading into week one, we're starting to see some line movement out there on these games that have been stale for, upwards of 2.5 months at this point. Have you already taken your positions? Are you waiting to see where the market's going to go? How are you treating this week?
I have pretty much I have given my customers, I committed to multiple plays, and I gave them the next batch of plays. So in reality, I am looking at about 3 or 4 plays that are in the fringe. I'm waiting to read. I'm on the fence whether they'll be plays or not, and then still looking at totals. So my top 3 plays are clear. I've made positions on them. The lines moved a little bit against me only by a point, but I want to make a comment on that. And there's a lot of professional bettors that say, if the line moves and you don't get the best line, don't bet the game. Well, I don't believe in that philosophy. I believe in the philosophy that if you do your work, if you have a line that you are set that you're going to bet it at, even if that line moves, if you feel there's value from the difference in your line to where that line is, and you haven't bet it yet, I would still bet that play. There is still value to me at that play. So, what I tell myself is this: if the line was -1 and it went to -2, if the line opened at -2, would I have bet it? Absolutely. Just because someone moved at 1 point doesn't mean I'm going to come off a game and not play that game for that reason.
Yeah, and another important point there, too, is, everyone talks about getting the best number. Well, there may be a handful of people out there that get the absolute best number. So what I always try to tell the listeners here of the show, get the best number that you can. If you get a game at 6.5 or 7 with reduced juice, that's better than getting 7.5. So just get the best number that you can. Focus on that. Don't take the absolute worst of it. You're probably not going to get the absolute best of it just because of, how quick these markets move in some instances. But that's also an important point, too. I think that a lot of people, the hard and fast professionals here, that don't really have to broadcast to a larger audience will say that, you absolutely have to get the best number. It's great if you can. Most people can't. Most people don't have access to that. So just get the best number that you can. Just don't take the absolute worst of it.
Let's be honest. I think you talked to Brad on Thursdays. Brad and I would go down to the Wynn when Johnny Avella was there prior to last year, and he would open up lines Sunday. So, you're in a single file line. You have a $2,000 max, and he's changing the line after you make each bet. So there's one person getting the best line, period. One person in the world getting the best line if you want to be that hardcore and saying, what was the best line? Sometimes it bounces back. Sometimes a casino actually opens up another number lower than it is. But, realistically, when you're looking at that one line at one number, there's very few people getting that line at that number. So, again, I think you said it correctly. The lines vary. There's the New Jersey options now. There's the offshore options. There's the Vegas options. But make sure you shop around because, you have 100 plays and a 2-play swing is 4%, 2 to the negative, 4.4 to 2.2 to the negative, 2.2 to the positive. That's a 4.2% swing in your bankroll. Imagine, having a $10,000 bankroll and the extra 4.4% at the end of the year. It makes quite a difference.
All right, so we're going to look through some of these games here for Thursday and Friday, and some of these aren't the sexiest matchups, but I do want to try and get opinions on as many games as I possibly can here over the course of the season. So Thursday night, big line here, game 139-140, Texas State and Texas A&M. Was 34.5 on the open. Now it's in the 33.5 type of range. Again, not a sexy game, not a game that a lot of people are going to have too much interest in. But as we just talked about with preseason week 4, maybe those are the games you do want to look at. So any thoughts on this one here, Rolf, with a Texas State team that does look to be a little bit improved this year?
Well, they're the most experienced team coming back. Now, we'll take that with a grain of salt because this team was 3-9 last year. this team lost to Rutgers by 28 points and got outgained by 254 yards. So if you return 19 starters that were some of the worst returning starters in football, how much can you improve? Yes, you will be improved. You have a first-year head coach now in Jake Spavital. But again, the 19 returning starters is something a lot of people look at. When you're looking at these 30-point favorites, is the team number one motivated to win? And is the team's number twos and number threes good enough to run the offense to continue to keep the score where it is or run up the score? And I've talked to a few people on the side, and, when you're talking about this game, everyone mentions, oh, well, A&M has Clemson on deck. They're not going to be concerned at all for this game. I disagree with that thought. You remember that last year. I don't know how many people remember. A&M scored with under 30 seconds to go, and a 2-point conversion cost them from tying that game against Clemson in week number 2. And, oh, yeah, by the way, in the fourth quarter, they fumbled into the end zone for a touchback in the actual win. So, you're looking at an A&M team that knows they can compete. Yes, they lost. Yes, Clemson's getting all the love. But I think A&M actually wants to show more wrinkles. Again, Clemson lost 3 defensive linemen to the NFL. Yes, they have a lot of talent. But I think A&M is a team that wants to run it up. Jimbo Fisher, when he has a good team, is a very good favorite. A&M's 9-1 their last 10 as a favorite. They have an offense that is exciting enough where they can press the pace. Your backups are, your backups are kids that are going to have to play because you have Clemson in 2 weeks, you have Auburn in 4 weeks. So I think Jimbo Fisher comes out. I think he runs his normal offense. I think he's going to surprise a few people by putting in a few tweaks to give Clemson some extra film to study. And then I think he lets his twos run it up when you have a defense like Texas State that allowed the yards they have, and you're just running the ball and you're breaking big gaps with fast athletes. You can only help yourself but to run up the score. So I lean with A&M. They're nowhere near the top of my card, but with the offense and the O-line they have and the backup O-line that's experienced, I do give them the edge here at home to run up the score.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about these non-conference games is you could make a case and say, well, you should play the first half with A&M because who knows what they do in the second half. Are they motivated to run it up? The backups, as you mentioned, probably going to get an extended look here. So maybe you play the first half because they're going to have their starters out there. They're going to try to get their work in, make a statement, and then get those guys off the field so they don't get hurt. On the other hand, Texas A&M is better on every individual play than Texas State is. So over the course of a full game, the thought process would be that, incrementally they're going to enhance their lead throughout the course of the game. So you kind of have two different ways of looking at it here. You play the first half, expect them to start fast, or do you play the full game where over 60 minutes, they're far more likely to be the better team than they are over 30 minutes. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing about these big early season numbers.
And you also have to remember the opposite. Again, I'm going back to Phil Steele days when we talked to head coaches and, the ULM Warhawks, when they had Todd Berry as a head coach, they would sometimes have to schedule 3 SEC and ACC teams and sometimes 4 because they needed that money in their budget. Well, he basically said going into those games, guys, I am going to be so vanilla. I want no injuries. We need these games just for our athletic department fund. My goal is to win 6 games. I'm a 30-point dog in these games. I know I'm not going to win these games. I'm not going to show anything. So you always think, well, will the favorite be the letdown or be in a situation where they want to win? Sometimes it's the opposite. And Texas State is a team that, oh, yeah, by the way, they have their home opener against Wyoming, a game that they probably think they can very much win. So, don't always make the assumption that it's the Power 5 top-rated team that is the team that is motivated to win or not motivated to win. You can many times find value with the opposite.
All right, so as we move to Friday here, a game where we've seen a little bit of a line move, and actually kind of a more recent line move at that. Game 149-150, Wisconsin and South Florida. The Badgers making the trip down to Tampa here for this one. They're a 13-point favorite now, coming off of what was a pretty disappointing season for Wisconsin.
Yeah, I am not high on Wisconsin again this year. You know, I may have mentioned on the show, I may not. You know, I picked a long shot to come out of that division in Minnesota, and I think Nebraska's better than them. You know, I think I have, and I have Iowa ahead of them. Some of it is because of the talent, and some of it is because Wisconsin's crossover games, Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State. So you know you are in for a brutal season when you have to face 4 teams in your division, including Northwestern and those teams I mentioned, that are going to be a battle each week, and then have crossover games from the top 3 teams from the other division, which I all have in my top 15. You know you have one of the toughest schedules. Now, Wisconsin as a favorite was one of my favorite plays back in the day when they were a big favorite. And the reason is this. When you're Wisconsin, and be it Gary Anderson or be it Paul Chryst as head coach, and you had a team and you were at home and you were laying 14 or 17 points, people said, well, this is a rush offense. How can you lay big numbers with a rush offense? Even laying 20 wouldn't bother me. And my response is this. Listen, you have Wisconsin. You have 5 offensive linemen. You have a running back in Jonathan Taylor this year, 2,200 yards. What do? You hand off the ball, the offensive line box, the wide receivers learn to block, the running backs make big plays, and they matriculate down the field. Well, what happens when your backups are there? Your backups are running the exact same offense. They block, the running backs get openings, the running backs score. I would much rather back a rushing offense in that situation than a team that's a pass team that when they have a big lead and they're trying to slow up the pace, what do? They have to play an entirely different offense by running the ball. So if you have a more physical team against a smaller foe, Wisconsin's a situation I like backing them. With that said, I completely went off the grid a little bit because I don't like Wisconsin in this role at USF. I have USF as a fairly improved team. I think that my line is 10. I think the heat and humidity are certainly going to have a factor in this game, and it's a situation with a freshman quarterback for Wisconsin. Having Central Michigan at home doesn't affect me. I mean, you're looking at this more as a game than you are in Central Michigan. But, you're off a season where you just didn't get margin, and I don't think they will again this year. I have a stat which I tweeted out, and I'm trying to find it now, but it's week 1, non-conference home dogs. Since 2014, as I babble and keep looking through my Twitter.
Well, I guess I'll spare you here for a minute and say that,
Thank you.
That's the interesting thing, too, is that, these big dogs, I mean, they want to pull off that upset. They want to give the home fan base something to be excited about. They want to start their season off on the right foot. I mean, sometimes if you're a big road favorite, you may not be all that motivated in that game.
I completely agree with that. It's a tough situation to go at. USF has a decent crowd. Here's the number, and I apologize, I didn't have it earlier. Looking back since 2014, so we have a nice 5-year sample size. Non-conference week 1 home dogs, 34-18, 65.4%. Now, I'm never going to base a play on an angle. I probably will never. I don't base a play solely on a system. But when you have a 65% system that makes complete sense, where you have over 50 scenarios in over 5 years, it's something you certainly have to look at. And I'm just going to run them down. Home dogs this week, BYU, Nevada, Oregon State, USF, Coastal Carolina, Liberty, Wyoming, and Louisville. Now, some of those I do like the away favorites in the role, but certainly something that people should be writing down, paying attention to, seeing how it does this year if they don't like the teams and marking them down for next year. Again, a 65.4% play on a system to me that makes great sense.
All right, how about game 155, 156 here? Colorado State and Colorado, the Rocky Mountain Showdown in Denver, about a half hour for Colorado, about an hour and 5 minutes or so for Colorado State here. So both teams should be well represented in the Mile High City. Colorado up to a 13-point favorite now. There's some 13.5s out there in the marketplace as well. So some high hopes for Mel Tucker's first season.
I am on Colorado. This is one of those games that's in the mix for me to be a play. My number is 18. I think Mario in his second. I think that Colorado State with Bobo is a team that is just on their way out. I have them as one of the lowest rated teams in the Mountain West. I think that, yes, they returned 11 starters, I believe, off the top of my head, but that they're starters that that wouldn't start on most other Mountain West teams. And that's how I compare them, is if you have returning starters that are all conference, that's one thing. If you have just a number of returning starters. Now, you could say Mel Tucker in his first year only has 11 returning starters for Colorado with 4 on defense, but they had a decent recruiting class. They had a bunch of guys in for spring. Talent-wise, I think they opened up the gap with their recruits relative to Colorado State. Colorado State got close there for a few years. I don't think anyone on that team can keep up with the Montez and Chenault duo. And for those that haven't ever seen Laviska Chenault, he is probably one of the top 2 players in the Pac-12, just a dynamic wide receiver. And I just think there's way too much speed on Colorado. I think that, last year was a 45-13 win as a 7.5-point favorite. I see much of the same type of game in that same type of range. They've made it 3 straight years. They know the importance of this rivalry. Yes, they have Nebraska on deck, but you're not looking past this Colorado State team where other teams in the situation with Nebraska on deck and then Air Force after that, maybe in a look ahead, they're not. Playing where all these kids dreamed about playing in Bronco Stadium. I am a believer in Colorado this year.
All right, well, then I guess there's one more game to touch on here as we move down to game 159-160. Oklahoma State laying 2 touchdowns and a hook at Oregon State, which is kind of an interesting week 1 matchup here. And it's also interesting that Oregon State's been taking the sharp money so far.
Yeah, I am torn on this game. And I knew we were going to talk about this game, but this is one of the games when I go through and I line, and then I basically go through and, it's much harder to do at the start of the season because no matter what we think we know, until we see the eye test, you just, no matter what people read about Florida, Miami, or Florida, there's not the same teams that you thought if you played the game out in your head the way the game went. So, it's a situation where I've gone back and forth. I will say this, week 1 away favorites of 13 or more have gone 21-0 straight up, but 8-13 against the spread. Again, the home dog record applies here of 65%. And Oklahoma State, to me, is just a rebuilding team. I have them 6th in the Big 12 this year. And I think this is, even though they're going to Oregon State, I think this is a situation where they may be looking past Oregon State. This is an Oregon State team that has been bad for many years. This is an Oregon State team that, looked like they were going to give Ohio State a run last week and got blown out in the second half and gave up 77 points. But, it is Jonathan Smith's second year. He had the players very excited to start the year when they were 1-1, but then it quickly derailed when they lost to Nevada in week 3. You do have 16 returning starters, and you return some of the most experience that any team has. You have 66 of your 81 lettermen back. So it's a game that I'm just not sure how improved Oregon State is, and I'm not sure if I have Oklahoma State down too far in my power ratings. So will I be excited for the game? Yes, because I will learn a lot moving forward. But as far as the game goes, I look at the dog if I have to make a lean, and I also look for the under. The total is high with where it is. Oklahoma State with a new quarterback and losing Hill. Hill was banged up last year and split carries with Hubbard, but I think Hill's a huge loss to them. And a game, again, about where I have numbered, but I would lean with the under as well.
Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at WagerTalk.com. I know that you guys are very excited about what you've got going on with the Gold Sheet over there.
Yeah, well, Wager Talk continues to grow. It's turning into quite a media conglomerate. We purchased the Gold Sheet. There's a special if you go and buy week one of the Gold Sheet. It's listed as $9, but the code BTB1 will get you the Gold Sheet this week for $1 plus $36 of coupons. Teddy and I started a live TV show. Teddy Covers from Wager Talk and I started a live TV show last Friday on Sports Grid. It's going to be carried on some of the streaming stations right now, the Hulus and those type of stations. They're just signing up contracts now for the next week or two. And again, if you're going to bet the preseason, guys, make sure you go and download my guide. It's you go to the Ralph Michaels page at Wager Talk. It's a free download. You get quarterback stats for each of the 3 games, team stats for each of the 3 weeks. Another team I'll just mention quickly is, Bill Belichick's his own DC again this year. He did not name a DC. He's been calling the plays. His defense in preseason has been spectacular. It's been amazing. He had 9 sacks the first week. I think he has 16 sacks, his defense for the year. And I think he has a little chip on his shoulder calling the defense again. That's something else to keep an eye on for Thursday.
Once again, Rolf Michaels, his work can be found over at WagerTalk.com, at CalSportsLV on Twitter, and that promo code again for the Gold Sheet, BTB and the number 1. Get that for $1 here for this week. Rolf, as a pleasure, man. Always appreciate the time. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.